I'm Amanda Hansen. We are unpacking everything from last night's election, a huge night for the city of Memphis. Not only did we have 17 candidates vying for the position of mayor, but dozens of candidates who were vying for the city council seats. And so all of them up for grabs. Joining us now to break down his thoughts on last night's big election night is Jackson Baker, Memphis Flyer political reporter. Jackson, good morning. How you doing?
Good morning. A little shaky. I went out last night and tried to bounce around the various headquarters as I indicated I would. It was a very dark night, and I decided, I better get home and just watch this on television. And then once I did that, things ended amazingly quickly. That is one of the earliest concessions I've ever seen, well before the 10 o'clock news, when all the stations were expecting to still have some suspense. And there was no suspense. Actually, for most of the campaign, the wise word was that Paul Young had the momentum. Paul Young would win. There were various times in which he seemed to be under challenge from this or that spurt by this or that candidate. But in fact, he maintained his momentum all the way, and he won fairly easily, all things considered. Now, there were no surprises in that race. There were some surprises in the council races, I think. I think I don't know where you want to begin, but Yolanda Cooper Sutton in Super District 8-3, I didn't see her coming at all. I actually thought that was the race in which Jared Price was ubiquitous. He was always doing something, and most of the interest of people I knew was, can he actually pull this off? Well, he couldn't. And Yolanda Cooper Sutton obviously had a good network, and she was able to win. Most of the races really kind of conformed to the form sheet. Again, the mayor's race certainly did, because Paul Young fairly early on was the favorite. Floyd Bonner, the sheriff, had been a front runner at the beginning. He got bashed so many times over jail deaths, and he was delayed during the campaign over the residency issue, and he couldn't raise any money. That impeded his momentum. And Van Turner was hoping to have a late minute surge. He didn't have much of a surge. There wasn't much of a surge for anybody in the daily voting on election day. There was too much drizzle. Not many people turned out, a little over 20,000. Former Mayor Willie Harrington did about as well as people expected he would do. And there were you could imagine other circumstances in which he could have risen higher. He finished third. Again, Young, then Bonner, then Harrington, then Turner. That was the big four. Everybody else just trailed off very distantly behind. The incumbents running for re-election in the council won as expected, although Easter Williams has got a runoff, and that's because there was some doubt as to whether there was a lingering doubt as to whether it was legal for her to serve on the council, because she works for the River Park Commission, and which is connected to the city. But she did make the ballot. She did lead, but she does have a runoff. And again, we have a new mayor. We don't know much about him because he's never held public office before. We learned during the campaign that Paul Young had served very admirably in various important offices in city and county government, but he never stood for election anywhere. And he wasn't exactly the kind of charismatic figure that usually rises out of nowhere, but he was very steady, and he seemed very competent. And there are grounds for optimism as we look into his term, which could be the first of two. What would you like to know?
No, well, one thing I thought, I listened to Paul Young's acceptance speech. It was very Memphis. And I feel like, maybe it was just me, but it felt like that there was just this momentum, this excitement surrounding. What kind of statement do you think it makes that Paul Young is the one that came out on top?
Well, again, I think that he was the only person who could actually galvanize a youth movement. He's young himself. His very name, Young, symbolizes that aspect of things. Everybody else seem to have been around for a while. They had been around for a while. Even Van Turner, who is not that aged, but he'd been a public person for several different manifestations. Head of the NACP, Shelby County Commissioner, at one time head of the Democratic Party. Paul Young was an unknown quantity, and basically, his enthusiasm for running, his enthusiasm for being able to do something for the city, kind of substituted for charisma. He didn't have a lot of that, but he had enough to win. And again, he galvanized the youth movement, which took him into victory. A lot of people thought that early voting, which seemed to tilt to older voters, might be an obstacle for him. It proved not to be, because whoever benefited from the older voters, that seemed to have been split among several candidates. Paul Young got all the youth all the time. And I expect that that sense of starting over, beginning with new horizons, is going to endure in his tenure as mayor.
You know, a lot of people were talking about with the rain yesterday how bad that was going to hurt the voter turnout. I was talking to Chip Washington with WLOK, and he was saying that he was disappointed with the number of people that came out yesterday. Obviously, there was a lot of early voting. Did you with the situation, did you expect that to maybe be the case with the way we were dealing with the weather yesterday?
Well, I realized it was going to be raining all day, and more of a drizzle than a real rain. But once I realized it was going to be raining all day, I figured that would depress the turnout. And again, several candidates needed the turnout, particularly Van Turner, to feed his surge, which did start happening late in the campaign. He needed a huge turnout, and he needed it again among some of the same youthful people that voted for Paul Young. There just wasn't enough new vote to go around. It didn't change the outcome at all. I suspect that the order of finish is exactly what it would have been at the end of early voting. I don't think there was enough vote yesterday to make a difference in the outcome.
Well, Jackson, any last remarks before we let you go?
Well, I think that we do have 3 runoffs. In District 2, Scott McCormick, who has been on the council before, is making a comeback. He's running against Jerry Green in the runoff. That is going to decide, one of the things that will decide whether we have a conservative council or a more progressive council. Scott represents the conservative point of view on many issues, and Jerry Green represents the liberal issue. We've got in District 3, Pearl Walker, who's been the candidate many times, and she's an activist. She could get her first victory, but James Kirkwood, who has a lot of prestige because he's both a minister and a former military person, he'll get a lot of votes. That's going to be an interesting race for those who want to follow that. And again, there's the in District 7, there's going to be a runoff as well. The super districts, there was not much suspense there, except for the fact that whatever happened to Berlin Boyd, who was the former incumbent councilman, he didn't show up, and he finished well back of the leader. That's, again, Yolanda Cooper-Sutton. Jared Price, who was one of the more active candidates during the season, convinced a lot of people that he could win in a district that demographically didn't favor him, but he had a lot of support. He was very energetic, but he finished out of the running. Beyond that, again, there weren't many surprises. And we get to move on with a council that could be shaded a little bit more conservatively or a little bit more progressively, depending on who wins the runoffs.
Well, Jackson Baker, Memphis Flyer political reporter, I always appreciate your perspective. And thank you so much for taking time to join us on the desk again this morning.
Well, you bet.